Hello and welcome everyone to another video on eruption sequence of teeth. And in this video, we'll be discussing about the eruption sequence of the permanent teeth. We have already discussed about the eruption sequence of the primary teeth or the deciduous teeth. If you haven't already watched the video, do check it out in our YouTube channel. So without further ado, let's begin our video. Similar to our earlier video, that is eruption sequence on the primary teeth, this video has also been divided into two segments. First, we'll be discussing about the sequence of eruption in each jaw, that is in maxilla and mandible. And in this second segment, we'll be discussing about the overall sequence of eruption of permanent teeth in the oral cavity. Unlike the case of the primary dentition, the eruption sequence in each jaw in case of the permanent dentition is slightly different. It is not the same for both the jaws as in case of the primary dentition or primary teeth. First, let's discuss about the maxilla. In case of the maxilla, let us see the different ages of eruptions for the different teeth. The central incisors in case of the upper teeth erupts usually at the age of 7 to 8 years, lateral incisors in 8 to 9 years of age, and then the cuspid or the canine at the age of 11 to 12 years, the first premolar at the age of 10 to 11 years, second premolar at the age of 10 to 12 years, and the first molar, which is the first to erupt, at the age of 6 to 7 years, and the second molar around the age of 12 to 13 years, and third molar usually after the age of 17 years, usually about 17 to 21 years of age. Now, taking only the lower age range for the eruption of each teeth, the sequence of the eruption of teeth in maxilla will be, first let me write all the teeth in the maxilla: central incisors, lateral incisor, followed by the canine, first premolar, second premolar, first molar, second molar, and finally the third molar. So the age of eruption of the first teeth to erupt was first molar at the age of 6 years, followed by the central incisor at the age of 7 years, lateral incisors at the age of 8 years, and instead of the canine, the premolars erupt first around the age of 10 years for both the first and second premolar. Usually you can take age 9 years for the first premolar also. And after the eruption of the second premolar in the maxilla, the teeth to erupt is the canine at the age of 11 years, second molar at the age of 12 years, and the third molar at the age of 17 years. So here the sequence will be first molar, first to erupt, which is then followed by the central incisors at the age of 7 years and 8 years, lateral incisors, and before the eruptions of the canine, there is eruption of the first premolar and the second premolar at the age of 9 and 10 years. And finally, after the eruption of the premolar, there is eruption of the canine at 11 years. And after the eruption of the canine, there is eruption of the first molar. And finally, the third molar, usually at the age of 17 years. So we can see there is a gap of 1 year for the eruption of the subsequent teeth. That is first molar at the age of 6 years. After that, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 years. So for the eruption sequence in maxilla, we can make a mnemonic that will be: Mama is in pain, Papa can make medicine. Mama as in first molar, I of is as in central incisor, I of in for the lateral incisor, P in the pen stands for the first premolar, which is then followed by the second premolar, and after the completion of eruption of premolars, the canine erupts. M as in second molar, and finally the third molar. So in this way, the eruption sequence can also be memorized, and age will be 6 years, 7 years, 8 years, 9, 10, 11, 12, finally 17 years. So this is an easy way of rememorizing the eruption sequence as well as the eruption age for the different teeth in maxilla. Now, in case of the mandible, there are usually two differences in case of the mandible. So similarly, before going into the sequence, first let's get the idea about the age of eruption for the different teeth in the mandible. First teeth to erupt are the first molar at the age of 6 years and the central incisors at the age of 6 to 7 years, followed by the lateral incisor at the age of 7 to 8 years. Canine usually erupts earlier than that of the premolar at the age of 9 to 10 years. First premolar at the age of 10 to 12 years, second premolar at the age of 11 to 12 years, followed by second molar at the age of 11 to 13 years, and finally the third molar or the wisdom teeth at the age of 17 to 21 years. So the difference between sequence of eruption in maxilla and mandible are the central incisor and the first molar in case of the mandible erupts at the same time at around age of 6 years, which is then followed by the eruption of the lateral incisor at the age of 7 years. And unlike the maxilla, the canine erupts prior to the eruption of the premolars in mandible at the age of 9 years. And then the first premolar erupts at the age of 10 years. The second premolar erupts at the age of 11 years, which is then followed by the eruption of the second molar at the age of 11 to 13 years. So we can take 12 years. And finally the third molar at the age of 17 years. So the eruption sequence here will be 6 years for the central incisors and the first molar, then the 7 years for the lateral incisors. There is a gap of 2 years. Then canine erupts at the age of 9 years, 10, 11, 12, and finally the third molar at the age of 17 years. So it is easier in case of the mandible to know this eruption sequence, that is because canine erupts earlier than that of the premolars. So this was about the eruption sequence in each jaw and a way to memorize it. Now moving on to the next part of our video, or the next segment of our video, that is overall eruption sequence. Similar to the primary dentition, in case of the permanent dentition also, there is no fixed rule or there is no hard and fast rule that the eruption of one jaw completes first and then the eruption of the other jaw occurs. Here the eruption also occurs in a mixed way. For example, the first teeth to erupt are the mandibular central incisors and the first molar, which usually erupts at the age of 6 years. And after that, the teeth to erupt will be the maxillary central incisors, that is at the age of 7 years. So there is mixed way of eruption between the maxilla and mandible. Now the overall sequence of eruptions of the teeth can be better memorized using a mnemonic called as the main method or main technique of remembering the overall eruption sequence. So to better understand this, first let me list down the teeth that are present on one side of the maxilla and mandible, that is for the maxilla. Similarly for the mandible, and let me write the age of eruption of each tooth. The first teeth to erupt is the maxillary and mandibular first molar at the age of 6 years, and also the mandibular central incisor at the age of 6 years. For the maxilla, CI erupts at the age of 7 years, lateral incisor erupts at the age of 8 years. Then there is eruption of the premolar, that is at the age of 10 or simply 9. Then second premolar at the age of 10 years, canine at the age of 11 years, and the second molar at the age of 12 years, and third molar at the age of 17 years. For the mandible, lateral incisor erupts around the age of 7 years. The canine is first to erupt before the premolars, that is usually at the age of 10 years. First premolar also erupts at the age of 10 years, while the second premolar erupts only at the age of 11 years. The second molar erupts at the age of 11 years, and the third molar erupts at the age of 17 years. So here, if you look at the molar region, the maxillary and mandibular erupts at the age of 6 years. At the same time, this forms the eye of our main. Now, the next teeth to erupt is the central incisors in the mandible, followed by the central incisors in the maxilla, then the mandibular lateral incisor, maxillary lateral incisors, and finally the canine. So we can see a letter M, and this represents the M of our main method of memorizing. Now for the letter A, we start with the mandibular first premolar, then maxillary first premolar, maxillary second premolar, mandibular second premolar, and finally the maxillary canine. So this has the same shape as the A, and for N, we start with the second molar in the mandible, then the maxillary second molar, the mandibular third molar, and the maxillary third molar. So we can see the word M-A-I-N. So this was about the overall eruption sequence. So in this way, we can memorize the eruption sequence, that is M-A-I-N. So by this method, we can not only know the sequence of eruption, if we remember the age of eruption of 4 teeth, we can easily guess the eruptions of the remaining teeth. That is, we take the starting of each letter, that is 6 years for the central incisors, 10 years of the premolar, 6 years for the molar, and 11 years for the second molar. So if we remember 4 dates, that is 6 years for the central incisors, 10 years, 6 years of the molars, and 11 years for the second molar, we can pretty much guess the age of eruptions of the other teeth. Now to conclude, additionally, we can also understand that the teeth in permanent dentition usually erupts at the gap of 1 year of age. That is, there is usually gap of 1 year between the eruptions of the two teeth. And also, the premolar erupts earlier in case of the upper jaw or the maxilla. And in order to calculate the age of completion of calcification, we can simply add 3 years to the age of eruption of each tooth. For example, if we want to know the age of completion of calcification for the mandibular central incisor, we'll simply add 3 years to the age of eruption of the mandibular central incisors. That is, 6 plus 3 equals to 9 years. So the mandibular central incisor usually will have complete calcification by the age of 9 years. So this was all for today. I hope it's easier for you to remember the eruption sequence of the permanent teeth. So if you like this video, please give a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and if you have any suggestions or if you have any request, you can put it in the comment section. I'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.